We live in a world that is infatuated with strengths. Yes, we live in a world that is infatuated with strengths. When you find yourself hunting on the job market, one of the challenges is to figure out how best to parade your strengths while playing down your weaknesses, at least for the time being. How can I best display my portfolio of work? Which referees might speak to my unique strengths? And in fact, there's a whole mini industry which is devoted to helping job hunters identify and communicate their own key strengths. As well, over the last 20 years, I've noticed there's another industry that has emerged focused on what's called strengths-based leadership. Strengths-based leadership. Who wants to lead out of weakness? We live in a world infatuated with strengths. We love faster, higher, stronger. We gladly devote hour upon hour to admiring our Olympians' heroic exploits. So Nicola Ollie-Slagers clearing that. Can I even reach as high as the bar that she managed to jump over? Jess Fox twice out paddling the best of the rest. And then when it comes to interview time on television, who gets the airtime? Is it the medal wannabes or the medal winners? You know the answer. I've long enjoyed watching the rugby. This coming Saturday, I'm heading to the Bledisloe Cup for the first time in 23 years with a friend. But in that 23 years, has Australian rugby been a story of surging from strength to strength? That game I went to 23 years ago, there were 91,000 people in the crowd, almost an AFL final. What's going to happen this coming Saturday? Even the Bledisloe will struggle to gain half the crowd of an AFL final, especially if an Isaac Heaney keeps displaying such prowess for the Swans. Even the AFL's grabbed my attention, up there, Kazali. In there and fight, out there and Adam, show 'em your might. Yes, I can see the hands waving, and we live in a world infatuated with strengths. Some years ago, I found for Julie as a gift this very fine biography. It's called The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt. I actually have a photo here. Here we go. Next, here it is. Mount Rushmore, and Roosevelt is second from the right, with Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln as the greats of the American presidents. I found this biography for Julie and gave it to her, I think, for her birthday. And this volume, it's quite a rollicking tale. And she got almost to the end and she said, Stephen, he's not even president yet. I said, I know. After I got it for you, I realised it's not just one volume. I realised I would need to buy for you another volume. That's not enough. I realised I would need to get all 3 volumes for you. She read all 3. It's a bit detailed in US politics of the early 20th century. I read all 3. What an astonishing man. This is a fellow who, when he needed some time out, he would head into the Dakotas on his own to go hunting bison or buffalo or bear. This is a man who, when he was still very young, aged 24, he was developing as an historian, and he wrote a definitive and quite popular work on the history of naval warfare. The book title is The Naval War of 1812. This is a fellow who, age 40, he was at that point serving as Assistant Secretary to the Navy in Washington, D.C., and he didn't want to be stuck in an office in Washington, D.C., so he resigned so that he could go and fight against the Spanish army in Cuba. He led his victorious Rough Riders, and by the end of that, his lifelong favourite title became the Colonel, hence Volume 3, Colonel Roosevelt. Everyone called him Teddy, he hated it. The Colonel was what he wanted. What a man! He was an adventurer, a conservationist, a writer, a rancher, a soldier, eventually a president. He was a man who knew how to enjoy the spotlight. He was a man who knew how to work the spotlight. I tell you, it's not just a recent thing. We live in a world infatuated with strengths. I'm guessing if you want to read about Roosevelt, I could recommend a skinnier book than this, not that I've read it. We are perpetually hunting for heroes, and who doesn't love a shining new hero? Who doesn't love someone who is strong, fast? We're quick to glorify the shrewd, the impressive, the self-made or the self-sufficient, the superachiever. And so my question is, what would a hero of the faith look like? Genesis 14, we don't often have an applause after a Bible reading, do we? But Guma, thank you. It is a bit like hearing a whole lot of Hebrew, isn't it? Genesis 14 seems a strange episode from over 4 millennia ago. At age 75, the backdrop is, at age 75, exalted father Abram actually, the name Abram means exalted father. Exalted father Abram received an astonishing, gracious, unilateral call and promise from God Most High. The backstory to that was after the rupture and devastation of the fall of our first parents, this call to Abram and this promise were big step one in God's sovereign plan to bring, in the end, restoration to the entire cosmos. It starts with a promise to one man. And Ian had us a few weeks ago in Genesis 12 and walked us through what were his 4 Ps. The promises focus on, Abram, you're going to have a people and a place, and you're going to fit into a program. And it's all guaranteed by, says God, by my own presence and protection. That's what the promise is all about. As we read in Genesis 12 and 13, almost before we can blink, we discover that faith-filled Abram is deeply flawed. Yes, there are big ups in his story, but there are also very serious downs. Paul tells us that he is our father in the faith and we walk in his footsteps. And so what we're doing here over weeks and weeks is we're tracing the story of faith-filled Abram and beautiful Sarai. And as we do it, we gain profound lessons in faith itself. Hence my question, what does a bona fide hero, what does a genuine hero of the faith look like? Genesis 14 arrives in 3 fairly neat scenes. Scene 1 is all about the international political stage and the political drama and outright conflict, verses 1 to 12. After 12 years of unwilling subjugation to Kedorlaomer, and we can only imagine it's 12 years of economic bondage. It's 12 years of paying annual tributes to Kedorlaomer and his mob, who lived 3,000 kilometres to the east in what we would call southern Iran. 12 years of grudging loyalty at best, 12 years mostly of resentment. Why do we have to be under their thumb? After 12 years, these 5 local kings and their cities around the southern Dead Sea band together and rebel. Kedorlaomer is a mighty eastern monarch. The rebellion, because he's so far away, the rebellion of this little confederation of 5 local cities headed by the king of Sodom can last a little while, but only a little while. An end is coming. And so after enjoying glorious independence for 1 year, no tributes to pay, no bondage, Kedorlaomer summons 3 fellow overlords, and now we watch as this fearsome coalition forms in what we know as Iran and Iraq, and coming from the north, most likely in Turkey. And I do have a map. I know that there's no way that you can read the place names on there unless, well, I can read them, but you can't. But you can see the blue line coming down from the north to the east of the Jordan River Valley. This is all the micro details in there. It's saying that highway is called the King's Highway. And these 4 kings with their armies come storming down the King's Highway, stomping on every people group that they come across. They head past the 5 cities in the box at the southern end of the Dead Sea. They head further south, and then they swing around back towards the north. Retribution is nigh. Given such brute military strength, how can these 5 client kings, technically they're called vassal kings, how can these 5 vassal kings, because they pay tribute, how can they have any hope? And you might also wonder, why are we hearing this story? It might matter to them in their time and place. The 4 kings, most likely the reason that they come with their armies is this is the Bronze Age, and bronze needs copper, and they don't have a supply of copper except around the southern Dead Sea, and they've lost their supply. There's a little clue there why they care about this. And the 5 kings, well, of course they care because they're about to be smothered. But for us, isn't this just an obscure ancient curiosity of Bronze Age politics? Why would we care? Hold on to that question. Despite the advantage of local knowledge, 4 versus 5 turns out to be barely a contest. The 5 have no chance. Verse 10, they very quickly flee. I was trying to put this in Australian terms, and I thought, imagine if we roused up all the armies of Sydney and we said, okay, Sydney, now we want the armies of Melbourne and Adelaide and Brisbane, and we're going to swarm the Newell Highway running north-south in central New South Wales. And I just picked out 5 towns. I've got nothing against these 5 towns. Narrabri, Coonabarabran, Gilgandra, Galargambone and Coonamble. What chance have they got? Zip. Not a hope. In the same way, these 5 cities are humiliated. They can't even manage to avoid tumbling into their own familiar tar pits. I did think when Julie and I were visiting Coober Pedy, there was big signs saying, don't walk backwards. Because there's mine shafts everywhere. Don't walk backwards. People seriously fall down. And so what's recorded for us is the complete plunder of 5 cities and military and economic devastation, and the kicker in the tail, and maybe this is why we might care, is that wealthy Lot, nephew of Abram, living just near Sodom. Verse 12, he's unable to defend himself either, and he and his possessions are carried off as loot. That's scene 1. Scene 2, verses 13, 14, 15 and 16, is a picture of daring rescue. So someone sends out the bat signal. Safely encamped in the hills of Hebron to the west of the Dead Sea, exalted Father Abram learns of the devastating losses, and he's got this secure 4-way alliance with these 3 Amorite brothers. And because of their alliance, Abram feels, okay, I think it's safe enough to leave. All my tents and goods and all the women and children, I can leave them all behind. They'll be safe enough. The security teams will cover my back while I'm gone. Already, by the way, I think there's a hint of God's providence. Because Lot, you might remember, chose the cities of the plain, which look so lush, but instead of giving him protection, they made him a target. Whereas for Abram, up in the hills, it looked like the second-class grazing land, but humanly speaking, Uncle Abram's apparently inferior location provided protection and allies. We're told that Abram has 318, it's very specific, 318 trained men born in his household. Now, none of them are sons, so they must be the loyal children of slaves. There's a whole sidebar there. All I'll say today is the Bible is never positive about slavery and is very, very negative about the slave trade. But we can't go further into that this morning. Clearly, God's promise to make Abram's name great is now well underway. He takes his 3 allies, he takes his 318 loyal troops. Very quickly, they head north on that red line, way up to Dan. They pursue the 4 warrior kings and all their stolen chattel, and then Abram, like a fine military colonel, devises an attack strategy. He directs his troops, and then he leads the pursuit even further, as far up off the map, as far as Damascus, home of Wadea, my recent barber in Melbourne. We talked about where does Damascus pop up in, I said, well, in the Bible. I know about Damascus from the Bible. I didn't actually remember Genesis 14. I didn't realise there was a mention of Damascus this early. It's a rout. 4 verses 1, barely a contest. He recovers all the loot and dear Lot. I imagine the conversation. You thought that living near Sodom was going to be the sophisticated, safe option. That's the twits option. And Abram, I'm so glad you came, Batman. And you're no Robin. What's the point of this epic drama so far? Well, very clearly, first, God has not yet been mentioned, but his glorious promises are already well underway. But there's more that we can say than that. Think about Abram. At this point, Abram, he must be about age 80. We don't know exactly, but somewhere around 80. At age 80, he is sufficiently strong and sufficiently inspiring. I look at what he does here and I think, Abram, you could go and conquer the entire land of promise under your own steam almost single-handedly, couldn't you? What a man! He's like a rugged hero for a Clint Eastwood to play one day. And yet, despite his impressive military prowess, despite his tactical skill and his astute long-term preparations, despite this astonishing triumph, if it were in a movie, there'd be strings soaring and a timpani thumping and a low brass chorale, at least if I were the movie maker. Despite it all, Abram will not seek to fulfill God's promise in his own strength, under his own steam, on his own initiative. At least not for now. Once we get to chapter 16, then we see Abram really putting his foot in it, but not now. I wonder if Abram senses, God's made promises, and those promises go right to my weakness. And there's little point trying to be a famous strongman and winning applause when I've got these great and precious promises, the nub of which goes to my weakness? In particular for him, he would say, I'm 80 and I have no son. God's power is not shown best through my strengths. No, God's power is shown best through my weakness. Paul, our apostle, would firmly agree. God's power is shown best when I am weak. That's the truth of it. And so what does a hero of the faith, a genuine, bona fide hero of the faith, what does he look like? However impressive his strengths, even though he's living in a world that is forever infatuated with strengths, he will make little of them. He will not seek worldly applause. He will not seek the spotlight. He knows that God's promises address his own glaring weakness. And humbly and patiently, he will make those promises his own primary reality. In this episode, he oozes it. What is your life about, Abram? The promises of God. The promises of God. That's the primary reality. I wonder, is it surprising that Yeshua, son of David, son of Avram, Jesus, son of David, son of Abraham, Matthew 1:1, is it surprising that Jesus perfectly embodies this same humble contentment? God's power is not shown best through my strengths. God's power is shown best when I am weak. Now there's more. Scene 3, verses 17 to 24. This now becomes the climax. There's the encounter with these two contrasting kings. First, there's king number 1, king of ungodly Sodom. In verse 17, this king approaches Abram in, I would say, a kind of rogue homage. Is it real? I don't think so. But then, before you know it, in verse 18, a second king emerges. We've never heard of this king number 2 before. We'll barely hear of him again. He's from Salem, or in Hebrew, Shalem, which sounds very similar to Shalom. It's most likely Shalem is the future capital city and temple city of Jerusalem, Jerusalem. The name Shalem, Salem, means peace. The name Melchizedek, very literally, it's like crunching two words together, like butter and fly, but it has more meaning than that. Melech means king. Zedek means righteousness. Melchizedek is king of righteousness. He is the king of righteousness coming from Shalem, the city of peace. He knows something of God Most High. He approaches as a priest offering blessing and table fellowship. And for Abram, okay, which king are you going to choose to honour? King of Sodom or king of Salem? Verse 18. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. And then Abram gave him 1/10 of everything, that is, of all the plunder. 1/10. What I think seems perhaps the strangest part of this strange story is that this moment of meeting between Abram and Melchizedek pops up again In the New Testament, it seems like such an obscure encounter, but it's recounted at length in Hebrews 7. We're not going to do a whole study in Hebrews 7. We are going to dip in quickly. The thing in Hebrews 7 is, Hebrews 7 says the connection between Melchizedek and Abram in certain ways is parallel to the connection between Jesus and us. The connection between Jesus and us is parallel to the connection between Melchizedek and Abram. So let's dip into Hebrews chapter 7. This Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him, and Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. First, the name Melchizedek means king of righteousness, and then also king of Salem means king of peace. Verse 3, without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God. He remains a priest forever, and that becomes the guiding thought in Hebrews chapter 7, a priest forever. That's what we need. That's what you need. Someone who will mediate for you, someone who will intercede for you, someone who will save